By the time the file resurfaced in 2022, it had already been stamped with a word detectives hate more than any other: cold. Detective Aaron Cole hadn't been looking for her. He had been assigned to audit unresolved cases ahead of the county's data migration, a bureaucratic chore meant to digitize paper files before they were boxed up and forgotten for good. It was the kind of work that usually turned up nothing more than missing bicycles, old trespassing complaints, and reports that ended with no further leads. Then he opened a thin, yellowing folder marked simply, 2012, missing adult female, Hanover County adjacent. Inside was a single photo clipped to the front page. An elderly white woman with tired eyes and neatly combed gray hair sat on a floral couch, hands folded in her lap. The date on the back of the photo was 4 months before she vanished. Age at disappearance, 73. Grandmother of 4. Last known residence, a modest rental property outside Ashland, tucked along a quiet stretch of road most people only use to pass through. Before we continue with today's chilling story, please make sure you support the channel by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, and turning on notification bell, so you don't miss the next case just like this one. Cole leaned back in his chair, staring at the image longer than he meant to. Not because the case was dramatic, but because it was disturbingly quiet. No signs of forced entry. No reported arguments. No history of wandering or dementia. No confirmed sightings after she vanished. She had simply stopped existing. The original investigators had done what they could with the tools they had at the time. They'd interviewed neighbors, spoken to her adult children, walked nearby wooded areas, checked hospitals and shelters. Nothing had ever surfaced. After 2 years, the search slowed. After 5, it ended. And yet, something about the file bothered Cole. It wasn't what was in it, it was what wasn't. There were bank statements showing her Social Security benefits continued for years after her disappearance. Notes indicating rent payments were always on time. Utility usage logs that suggested someone, or something, was still drawing power inside the home long after she was officially gone. Back in 2012, none of that had raised alarms. In 2022, it screamed. Cole requested the supplemental records. When they arrived, the picture became harder to ignore. The payments hadn't just continued, they'd been consistent. Clockwork. Month after month. Year after year. 10 years' worth. Someone had kept her alive on paper. Before notifying his supervisor, Cole drove out to the property himself. The house sat just outside Ashland's town limits, closer to a patchwork of back roads and aging rentals than the historic downtown most people pictured. From the outside, it looked unchanged. Same faded siding, same narrow porch, same overgrown hedges that had probably been there when she moved in. A new tenant lived there now. A middle-aged man who told Cole he'd rented the place for just under a year and used only the main floor. The basement, he explained, was unfinished and creepy, filled with old storage items left behind by previous occupants. Cole asked if anyone had complained about smells. The man hesitated. Every now and then, he said, there's this weird cold air down there. Like a freezer door left open. I figured it was just insulation problems. That word again. Freezer. Cole requested permission to inspect the basement. The tenant agreed, relieved more than anything. No one liked unexplained cold spots. The basement steps creaked as Cole descended. The space was dim, lit by a single bare bulb. Dust coated everything. Boxes were stacked along the walls, some marked with dates going back over a decade. Then he saw it. Against the far wall sat a deep freezer. Not new. Not plugged in. Old. Industrial looking. The kind you'd expect to find in a butcher shop or a church kitchen, not in a residential basement. Its lid was sealed shut with a rusted clasp. Cole didn't open it. Not yet. Procedure mattered. He documented the freezer, exited the basement, and contacted his unit. Within hours, the house was cordoned off. The tenant was relocated. A warrant was secured. When the lid was finally opened under controlled conditions, the temperature inside was unnaturally cold despite being unplugged. And inside, the remains were skeletal, curled slightly to one side, wrapped in layers of plastic and old blankets. Time had erased most identifying features, but dental records would later confirm what Cole already suspected. The woman from the photograph. The grandmother of 4. Gone for 10 years, and never far from home. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. But it also raised a question no one wanted to answer yet. How had a human body remained hidden inside a residential freezer for a decade, without anyone knowing? The answer, Cole learned, wasn't simple. Financial records revealed that rent payments had been made under her name long after her disappearance. Social Security benefits had been deposited monthly into an account that should have been flagged years earlier, but never was. Someone had been careful. Too careful. Attention turned to the property's previous owner and manager, a man who had overseen the rental at the time of her disappearance. He'd since moved, changed jobs, and slipped out of local records almost as quietly as the woman herself. Cole reopened the interviews from 2012. Neighbors remembered seeing her grandchildren often. For kids who spent weekends and afternoons at her place because their parents worked long hours. She cooked for them, helped with homework, let them sleep on the living room floor during movie nights. She never would have left them, one neighbor had said back then. That statement hit differently now. Cole tracked down the grandchildren, now adults. They described a woman who called every Sunday, who never missed a birthday, who had no reason to vanish without a word. And yet, none of them had gone into the basement. No one had. Not the family. Not the landlord. Not the investigators. 10 years had passed while she waited in silence. As the forensic team began their work, Cole realized this case wasn't just about a disappearance anymore. It was about how many people had unknowingly participated in erasing someone's existence, by assuming, by overlooking, by moving on. And as evidence mounted, one unsettling truth became impossible to ignore. Whoever put her in that freezer had never expected her to be found. Not then. Not ever. And the deeper Detective Cole dug into the paper trail, the clearer it became that the freezer was only the end of the story, not the beginning. Because the question now wasn't what happened to her. It was who had been living off her death for 10 years, and why no one noticed until it was far too late. The freezer was removed from the basement just before dawn. Detective Aaron Cole stood in the yard as the evidence truck doors closed, watching condensation roll off the metal lid. Even after a decade, the cold inside had lingered, unnaturally so. Forensics would later determine that the freezer had been powered intermittently in its early years, likely enough to slow decomposition before eventually failing and sealing time inside it. But the bigger mystery wasn't the mechanics. It was the intent. Cole returned to the office and spread the case across his desk. Old photographs, handwritten notes, financial records, rental agreements. Patterns began to emerge, and none of them pointed to coincidence. The woman had been declared missing in late 2012. Yet her life, on paper, had continued uninterrupted. Rent. Utilities. Government benefits. Everything moved as if she were still waking up every morning in that house outside Ashland. Someone had taken control of her identity without triggering alarms. Cole focused on the money. Over 10 years, nearly $750,000 had passed through accounts linked to her name. The withdrawals were gradual, careful, never large enough to raise flags. The kind of precision that suggested patience, not panic. That level of control narrowed the field. Family was ruled out quickly. Her adult children had struggled financially in the years after she vanished, some even dipping into debt. If they had access to the funds, it would have shown. It hadn't. Which left one glaring possibility. The person who handled her rent. The property manager at the time, a man who had also assisted her with paperwork when she first moved in. Someone she trusted. Someone who had keys. Someone who knew her routines. Cole tracked him down through old tax filings and business records. The man now lived 2 counties away, working under a slightly altered version of his name. He had no criminal record. No outstanding warrants. On paper, he was clean. Cole requested an interview. The man arrived calm, cooperative, too prepared. He claimed the woman had told him she was moving to live with relatives shortly before her disappearance. Said she'd asked him to keep handling the property temporarily. When Cole asked why rent continued to be paid in her name, the man shrugged. She was old school, he said. Didn't trust banks. Didn't want to change things. Cole didn't challenge him, not yet. Instead, he shifted the conversation. Asked about the basement. The man hesitated, just slightly. I didn't really go down there, he said. She used it for storage. Cole nodded, then slid a photograph across the table. The freezer. The man's jaw tightened. That wasn't mine, he said quickly. Must have been hers. Except records showed she had never purchased one. And neighbors remembered something else. A low humming sound in the basement, on and off, for years after she vanished. Complaints that were dismissed. A cold draft that no one could explain. Cole returned to the grandchildren's statements. One memory stood out. One of them recalled helping their grandmother clean the basement shortly before she disappeared. There had been no freezer then. Just shelves. Boxes. Old holiday decorations. Which meant it had been brought in later. After she was gone. Forensics confirmed the remains showed no signs of natural death. Trauma consistent with blunt force injury had occurred near the time of death, though time had erased the specifics. It was homicide, but how and by whom remained unresolved. The freezer itself yielded little. No fingerprints. No identifiable fibers. Whoever had sealed it had done so carefully, deliberately, and long ago. As news of the discovery broke, public reaction exploded. How could a body go undiscovered for 10 years? How could benefits continue without checks? How could a freezer sit in a basement no one entered? The answer was uncomfortable, because no one looked hard enough. As the investigation intensified, the property manager's financial history came under scrutiny. Accounts linked to shell businesses. Cash withdrawals timed perfectly with benefit deposits. Assets that far exceeded his reported income. Still, there was no direct evidence tying him to the killing. Only to the aftermath. And then came the complication. The statute of limitations on several financial crimes had expired. Key documents had been legally destroyed. Witness memories had faded. Cole pushed anyway. He re-examined every complaint ever filed about the property. One stood out. A tenant, years earlier, had reported a smell that made breathing difficult, coming from the basement. The complaint had been closed after the manager claimed to have resolved it. That tenant had moved shortly afterward. Cole tracked him down. The man admitted he'd gone into the basement once. He'd seen the freezer, asked about it, been told it was broken and waiting for disposal. He hadn't opened it. No one had. Because no one expected the truth to be that close. As pressure mounted, the property manager hired an attorney. Communication stopped. He declined further interviews. Charges were prepared: fraud, abuse of a corpse, obstruction. But murder, that was harder. The case hinged on proof of involvement at the moment she disappeared. And 10 years had erased nearly everything that could provide it. Cole visited the house one last time before it was cleared for sale. He stood in the empty basement, staring at the spot where the freezer had been. It struck him then, not just how she'd been hidden, but how intentionally isolated she'd been made. Not buried. Not discarded. Stored. Preserved. As if someone wanted time to stop for her, while it kept moving for them. And just when Cole believed the case had given up all its secrets, a new piece of information surfaced, something overlooked in the original investigation. A single phone call logged on the day she vanished. A call that was never returned. A call that didn't come from family. It came from the property manager's private line. The phone record sat at the bottom of the page like an accusation. Detective Aaron Cole had reviewed it twice before it truly sank in. The call had been placed mid-morning on the day the grandmother vanished. It lasted just under a minute. There was no transcript, no voicemail left behind, no follow-up. What made it stand out wasn't the length. It was the timing. The call came less than an hour before a neighbor reported seeing her alive for the last time, standing on her porch, waving to her grandchildren as they were picked up after a weekend visit. She looked normal, calm, exactly as she always had. That call had never been mentioned in the original investigation. Cole dug deeper. Cell tower pings placed the property manager's phone within a half-mile radius of the house that morning. Not definitive, but enough to raise questions he knew would never be answered cleanly. When confronted through legal channels, the response was simple. He didn't remember the call. Too much time had passed. Memory failed. Coincidence. It was the same defense the case had been fighting for 10 years. Forensics continued their work, but time had done what time always does. Cause of death could not be narrowed beyond homicide. The exact date could only be estimated. Any chance of linking DNA or trace evidence to a suspect had long since evaporated. The freezer had preserved silence, not answers. The financial crimes, however, were airtight. Paper trails don't forget the way people do. Bank records showed a clear pattern. Benefits deposited under her name, rent paid to the same account, withdrawals routed through shell entities controlled by the same individual who had managed her property. The total amount stolen approached $750,000. Charges were filed. Elder exploitation, fraud, abuse of a corpse, obstruction, but not murder. Not officially. The absence of a murder charge split public opinion. Some believed justice had failed. Others believed the system could only work with what it was given, and it had been given almost nothing. The man was convicted on the financial charges and sentenced to decades behind bars. He maintained his innocence regarding her death until the end of the trial, insisting he had no idea what had happened to her. And legally, that was enough. The case was closed, but not solved. For the grandchildren, closure came in fragments. They were adults now, carrying memories that suddenly felt incomplete. Birthdays she never missed. Phone calls that stopped without explanation. A house they had played in for years, now revealed to have held their grandmother's remains beneath their feet. They struggled with guilt they didn't deserve. Why didn't we go into the basement? Why didn't we question the rent? Why didn't anyone notice? Cole met with them once, privately. There was nothing you could have done, he told them. This wasn't neglect. It was deception. The truth was harsher than blame. Someone had counted on routine, on assumptions, on people trusting systems that rarely look twice at the elderly. In the aftermath, policy changes followed. Benefit checks required more frequent verification. Rental oversight tightened. Cold cases were re-audited across the county. Too late for her, but not for everyone. The house outside Ashland was sold, renovated, the basement cleared, the freezer long gone. New tenants moved in, unaware of the silence that had once lived there. Sometimes, neighbors still claimed the basement felt cold. Just drafts, inspectors said. Just old insulation. Detective Cole kept her photograph on his desk long after the file was closed. Not because the case had defined his career, but because it reminded him how easily someone could disappear without ever truly leaving. She had been there the entire time. 10 years. Waiting. Not hidden deep in the woods. Not buried beneath concrete. But stored, quietly, where no one thought to look. And the most unsettling part wasn't how she was found. It was how close she had always been. To family. To neighbors. To help. The case remains officially unresolved. No one has ever been charged with her murder. And somewhere in the gap between paperwork and memory, the truth still exists, known only to the person who put her in that freezer, closed the lid, and trusted that time would do the rest. So the question remains, even now. Was this the perfect crime? Or just one that relied on everyone else looking away? The main question most people still ask till date is, was it someone close to her, or a stranger hiding in plain sight? Drop your theories in the comments. I want to hear every idea. And if you want to stay on top of more shocking true crime stories like this, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps keep these stories coming.